Mind still stands as a guiding light. Welcome to the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Reed. I'm Dr. Jason Reed, Associate Professor of Philosophy and Chair of the Theology and Philosophy Department at Divine Word College Seminary. In addition to teaching seminarians and religious at Divine Word, I also teach those in formation for the Permanent Diaconate Program in the Archdiocese of Dubuque, offering courses like the Philosophy of God, Christology, Metaphysics, Epistemology, and Trinitarian Theology. Here, we walk in the footsteps of Saint Thomas Aquinas, exploring the mysteries of existence, the nature of God, and the pursuit of wisdom that shapes the soul. That journey begins now. Welcome to the Thomistic Mind. I'm Dr. Jason Reed, and today we begin another episode. In this episode discussion, we move a little away from the formal nature of logic. We've been looking at, validity, truth, soundness, fallacies, modus tollens, all these different types of arguments, which is great. And I'm hoping that you are learning a lot and taking good notes, and hopefully you are having a Thomistic mind formed. But in this episode, we look at there's still formal principles of logic, but for the beginner, it has immediate practical use, in immediate practical value. And so these are the sorts of principles of logic that you would use in a debate format or in a dialogue or a discussion, things of that sort. And it's very, very important that you get down these concepts. And so today we'll be beginning our discussion talking about the concept of self-refutation. Concept of self-refutation, or sometimes it's called self-stultification or self-contradictions, things of that sort. And then if we have time, we'll begin and broach the concepts of necessary and sufficient conditions, which are extremely important for those who want to do theology, who want to do apologetics, who want to teach, who want to learn. So I guess, in a sense, everybody, right? Now, we've been receiving, just a quick note here, we've been receiving a lot of good feedback on how folks are enjoying the Thomistic Mind. And I know that some feel somewhat maybe overwhelmed at times. Maybe some of you are, you're listening to this as you're driving to and from work, or you're just waiting to pick up the kids from piano lessons, or you're just on the road for business, and you don't have the time to get something to write down notes on, or if you don't, you may not be able to remember everything that's being said. And this is I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've been teaching this stuff for quite some time, and I've always I'm sensitive to how difficult philosophy, in particular logic, can be at the beginning. And maybe in a podcast, episode, radio type format, it might seem hard to get all of it. Well, that would be true whether you could write things down. So I just want to encourage all of you to keep at it. Keep listening to the shows, even if it sometimes feels like this material is going over your head or you're unable to write things down. Trust me, you are learning and absorbing more than you realize. I'm speaking from personal experience. Now, what you can do, what can help everybody, and what I do before I teach classes, is before, say, you listen to the show, before the show comes on, or however you watch it, encourage you to say a prayer. Ask God to help enlarge and strengthen your capacity for memory. Ask God to help sharpen your powers of thinking, your powers of logic, pray to have your mind formed by logic and truth. And trust me, God will come through. He will come through. But no matter who you are, everyone has to work at logic. Everyone has to, in a sense, reflect upon these things, meditate upon these things, and you're going to encounter these things. So, and you're going to see this today. I mean, when we look through some of these practical principles and logic, the self-refutation and the conditions, both necessary and sufficient, if you really get these concepts down, you'll have a solid foundation as you begin to start thinking about philosophy, start thinking about and having a Thomistic mind. So with that admonition out of the way and encouragement, and I know lots of you are learning a lot. So I'm not saying this because I'm necessarily worried about everybody, but everyone needs some encouragement from time to time. They need, someone to be in a sense a source of comfort when it comes to studying these things, and that you can do it. So, with that, again, past us, let's move on to our topics for this episode. The first topic, as I mentioned before, is self-refutation. Self-refutation. And if I've said this once, I'll say it 1,000 times. In philosophy, in particular in logic, there isn't a lot of imagination when it comes to how one comes up with names for theories or names for principles. And so in philosophy, in logic, what the principle is or what is being said is in the name itself. So here, what's self-refutation, self-stultification, self-contradictions, those sorts of things? Well, it's in the name. Somehow, something is refuting itself. And when you learn the principle of self-refutation, you're going to be able to spot statements, spot claims that defeat themselves. This is one of this egregious error of self-refutation or self-contradictions happens all the time. I run into it constantly. And when you can learn how to spot it and how to interact with it, it is, in a sense, it's a large step forward in having a Thomistic type mind and be able to think clearly. Because people, I shouldn't say people, but ideas or patterns of thinking that are engaged in self-refutation, that's a sign of confused and muddled thinking. So the freer that we can liberate ourselves from having ideas and thoughts that are self-defeating, self-refuting, the clearer we can think. And of course, the clearer we can think, the easier it is to find the truth. So, have you ever heard someone make a claim that sounds really clever at first? You ever heard someone say something, it sounds very clever, sounds very shrewd, but when you think about it, it actually contradicts itself. Have you ever had just that sense? You're talking to someone and they're talking about like science, or they're talking about whether it be politics, or they're talking about something happening in the culture, debates, principles of fairness, whatever. It sounds very smart, but then you think about it, it just seems there's something amiss. There seems like there's some sort of inconsistency. Well, statements or claims that contradict themselves are called self-refuting statements. Self-refuting statements. And a self-refuting statement is a statement that can never be true. It is always false. And that has a big payoff. Because the payoff is going to be, if a statement is self-refuting, it means the opposite, it has to be true. So if a self-defeating statement is necessarily false, then the opposite, or what's trying to be denied, what's trying to be refuted, is necessarily true. And so I'll give you, let's go through some examples of this, just so you can. This is a very basic idea, and I think that once you get the hang of it, it won't be too difficult. So I'll state the principle formally, and then we'll dive into some examples. Okay. So when a self-defeating statement, by definition or by nature, is a statement that destroys itself the moment it's spoken. In other words, a self-refuting statement is a statement that is necessarily false the moment it is spoken, the second it's written, the second it's thought about. So how does that work? How does this self-refutation work? Well, we have to understand that statements are always about something. Every statement is about something. For example, all dogs are mammals. Right? Quote, quote, all dogs are mammals. That's a statement. It's a statement about dogs, and it's about mammals. Or all electrons have like a positive charge, would be a statement about electrons and their charge. All Chevys ride smoothly. It's the way I was raised, right? We were raised to be Chevy fans because we like the way the Chevys rode, although I do drive a Ford now. Sorry, Father. But these are statements about Ford, Chevys, electrons, and dogs. Okay, pretty straightforward. But some statements talk about themselves. Some statements talk about themselves. That is, they include themselves in what they are describing. And sometimes, when they talk about themselves and the way they describe themselves, they fail their own test. For example, consider this statement. All English sentences have 10 words. All English sentences have 10 words. Well, that statement is itself an English sentence, and it doesn't have 10 words. And so it fails its own rule. The statement, all English sentences have 10 words. All English sentences have 10 words, is necessarily false. It's a self-refuting statement because it is a statement that refers to itself, and it cannot be possibly true because it's doing the one thing, or it's somehow committing the one thing it can't do. That is, it's violating its own criteria. It's like a logical ricochet, or a logical ricochet. What's the Australian thing? Boomerang. Okay, it comes right back and hits the speaker. It comes right back and hits the the idea. So it's like Ralphie in A Christmas Story. A self-refuting statement is like shooting yourself in the eye, logically, not really. Okay, so self-defeating statements are logical ricochets, logical boomerangs. They are shooting yourself in the eye. Okay. So here are some classic examples of self-refuting statements. I just said this. No English sentence is longer than 3 words. Of course, that's an English sentence, and it is longer. It's necessarily false. I do not exist. I do not exist. Self-refuting, because you have to exist in order to deny it. There are no truths. No one can know reality. There is no certainty. There are no absolutes. Everything is relative. You shouldn't judge. All truths are scientific. If I can't hear it, taste it, see it, touch it, or smell it, I don't know. I only know things based upon my common observations, so on and so forth. So let me just repeat that. I might have done that too quickly. Here are some, so I'm going to give these self-refuting statements, and I want you to see, if you, just by listening to them, if you can catch where the self-refutation lies. If you can catch where the ricochet is, where the boomerang, where the Ralphie shooting himself in the eye happens. I do not exist. No one knows the truth. You can't. No one is certain. No one can know reality. There are no absolutes. Everything is relative. You shouldn't judge. All knowledge comes from my senses. If I can't see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, then I don't know it. Do you see the pattern? Every one of these statements refers to itself and in some way fails to satisfy its own claim. And that's why these self-refuting statements, and I will dive into these deeper here in a moment, it's why these self-refuting statements are necessarily false. Now, as a listener of the Thomistic Mind, as someone who's been, this is my, so what does this have to do? What's the big deal? Why does this matter? Here's why this matters. Because at this level of thinking is where all sound philosophy and bad philosophy begin. All sound philosophy begins with the actually undeniable, the actually unaffirmable. And all bad philosophy starts off with the self-refuting, does begin with the self-stultification. Okay, now I'm not talking about formal contradictions. I'm not saying self-defeating statements are necessarily formally contradictory. For example, the statement, I am God, the statement, I am God, is not formally contradictory. But it is actually unaffirmable. And so this is a very important distinction, because part of the Thomistic mind is understanding distinctions. So a self-refuting statement can be formally contradictory, but at a deeper level, the self-refuting is actually trying to deny something it can't, or it's actually trying to affirm something it can't. So a self-defeating statement is trying to deny what cannot be denied, or to affirm what cannot actually be affirmed. So in the statement, I am God, there is no formal contradiction. So pantheistic Hindus, for example, they do not commit a formal contradiction when they assert their pantheistic premise, Atman is Brahman, or I am God. And so Hinduistic pantheism, Buddhistic pantheism, they're logically consistent. However, it is actually unaffirmable for a finite being to affirm they are God. That is, what's ironic about pantheism is that they write all these books trying to convince people that they're God. Well, if you're God, you would know that you're God. And this is the sort of thing that when we argue against pantheistic, when you're doing, say, Christian or Catholic apologetics, and you're encountering the Eastern pantheism, this is going to be very helpful, because the pantheist, in a sense, knows they're logically consistent. Just to give you an example of how important this is, I don't know how many years ago, but years ago, I was at our home church, one of our first parishes. I believe it was at St. Pat's in Cedar Rapids, and a wonderful Catholic priest came to talk to us about his ministry in India. And it was, telling us about his ministry, talking about, it was basically trying to raise some funds for his ministry in India. And I have been studying pantheism for quite a while, and so at the break between masses, I went up and spoke to him for a little bit, and I asked him, how difficult is it to witness or to evangelize or try to reach out to pantheists? And he very frankly, he said, it is really hard to debate pantheists, because when I try to talk about Christianity or Jesus, he's just part of the pantheistic Parthenon, right? He's just one of many gods. So when I talked about Jesus, I like your Jesus very much. They take Jesus or the crucifix and they put him on the mantle along with all the other Buddha, Vishnu, Krishna, all the other gods and avatars. He said, because when pantheism the Hindus tends to swallow everything. And so as we're talking, I said, here's one tactic you could ask them, is if Atman is Brahman, like if we all are God, then how did we get God amnesia? If we are God, if our Atman is Brahman, that's their way of saying that my inner reality, my inner self is ultimate reality. That is, when they say Atman is Brahman, they're saying ultimate reality lies within all of us, and that ultimate reality that lies within us is the very same thing. And he said, he was really appreciative of that. He said, I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to go try to show them that when they start saying that they're God, Jesus isn't saying that he's God in the same way. What Jesus is saying that he is God is that he doesn't need a book to help him. He isn't achieving this. Now, when Jesus says, I am God, he's distinguishing himself from us. When we are saying we're God, we're trying to overcome our God-like amnesia. So again, you see the difference, right? It's not that the pantheist is making some sort of contradiction. There's no formal contradiction. However, when they try to arrive at the conclusion that they are a God, or they're trying to arrive at the conclusion that they are the Almighty, that's where the actually unaffirmable comes in. That's where that's where the self-refutation comes in. They refute themselves in their attempts to explain to themselves and to others that they're God. That's why it's self-refuting for them. So, and this will become clear as we go on. Okay, but I just want you to distinguish between what's formally contradictory. So not everything that's self-refuting is formally contradictory, but it can be actually undeniable or actually unaffirmable. There's something deeper going on. Okay, so whenever you hear, to move forward, press on, whenever you hear someone argue a position, whenever you hear someone state their position or you're dialoguing, listen carefully. Listen carefully. To have a Thomistic mind, to be a good thinker, to be philosophical, is to listen, to have very good listening skills. Listen carefully. For one, is this statement about itself? And does it contradict its own claim? For example, in our state, non-Catholic denominations are really sprouting out across the rural areas and small towns, and they're growing. They're these community Bible colleges, Bible churches, community Bible churches, and they're oftentimes renting different halls, or they'll find office space for rent, and they'll start these services. And what distinguishes oftentimes these community Bible churches is their view of sola scriptura. The Bible alone teaches the truth. Well, one of the weaknesses of their theology is their own statements about the Bible. So when they say things like the Bible doesn't teach X, that is, unless something is taught in the Scripture, it's not doctrine. It's called sola scriptura. And I remember thinking, now wait a minute. That seems to be a teaching they want me to believe. It seems like they want me to believe that the Bible alone is the authority for faith and practice. The problem is that statement isn't found in the Bible. There's no statement in the Bible that says follow that all truth and all doctrine comes from the Scripture. So just a bald statement of sola scriptura is actually contradict its own claim, because if you're only supposed to believe things that are in the Bible, well, that statement, sola scriptura, is not in the Bible, so you shouldn't believe it, right? So this is a classic example of self-refuting. Now, more sophisticated evangelicals, the scholars have more nuanced views of sola scriptura, so I don't want to, paint a straw man there. But and again, in everyday conversation, just pay attention to those sorts of things. So when you hear someone argue a position, listen carefully. And hopefully you have been listening carefully to the Thomistic Mind. That's what this is. This is the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed. And I'm Dr. Jason Reed, and we've been talking about, I've been talking about self-refutation in this first segment. And self-refutation is a way to find the truth. Because if a statement is about itself and it contradicts its own claim, then because the statement is self-refuting, you can safely set it aside because it cannot possibly be true. So if the Catholic criticism of sola scriptura holds, that is, if the argument that we give as Catholics that sola scriptura by non-Catholic Christians is a self-refuting premise or self-refuting statement, then you can set it aside because it cannot possibly be true. Listen to the statement that's spoken. See if it refers to itself. See if it fails its own claim. Right? Sola scriptura is a logical boomerang. It hits the speaker. Sola scriptura is an example of a logical ricochet. Logical, what's that kid's name? From Ralphie. It's Ralphie shooting himself in the eye. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that, obviously, that doesn't mean that the Bible isn't the Word of God. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be believed. It doesn't mean that the Catholics deny the Scripture. No, it's just the statement that all beliefs of Christians must be found explicitly stated in the Scripture. Because I remember when I was thinking about becoming Catholic, and someone said to me, show me in the Scripture where it says you must see a priest to forgive your sins. But there is no verse that says it that plainly. And that really kind of bothered me for a while until I realized, wait a minute, your principle of understanding doctrine is a self-refuting premise. It's a self-refuting statement. And so it can't possibly be true. There's more to it than just finding a Bible verse that says that. Okay, so we've come to the first segment of today's show. After a quick break, we'll come back and we'll continue with self-refutation. The Church teaches that a solid education and grounding in philosophy is necessary to find the truth and avoid error, to understand the mysteries of divine revelation, to grasp the Church's doctrine, and to engage an unbelieving world. Philosophy is so valued by the Church that she requires it to form the intellectual life of her priests. Read Thomas is an online program created to make this intellectual formation more widely accessible. Developed and taught by Dr. Jason Reed, the courses combine academic rigor with a spirit of faith, presenting the great themes of classical and Thomistic philosophy in a way that is clear, structured, and faithful to the Catholic intellectual tradition. Participants encounter fundamental questions of philosophy through topics such as the pursuit of wisdom, an introduction to philosophy, an overview of philosophy's origins, methods, and enduring questions. There's He Who Is, examining the classical view of God's attributes and their theological and spiritual implications. We also have the mystery of existence, the philosophy of creation, exploring the metaphysical principles underlying the doctrine of creation. Then we have the three-person God, the mystery of God's inner life, a philosophical study of the Trinity's interrelations. There's also St. Thomas Aquinas' Philosophy of the Angels, where we consider the nature and role of spiritual beings in Thomistic thought, and further courses that engage the treasures of the Catholic intellectual tradition. Read Thomas seeks to cultivate not only knowledge, but also a deeper appreciation of the harmony between faith and reason, helping participants enter more fully into the wisdom of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Church's philosophical heritage. The website is www.readthomist.com. That's www.readthomist.com. The email is read.thomist@gmail.com. That's reed.thomist@gmail.com. At Read Thomas, we believe the life of the mind is for every Christian. Welcome back to the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed. I'm Dr. Jason Reed, and this is segment 2 of today's episode, where we're looking at self-refutation. Now, in future episodes later this spring, we'll be looking at modern philosophy and modern errors in theology. As we look at G.K. Chesterton's book on St. Thomas Aquinas, there'll be some key chapters and pages in there where Chesterton alludes to how St. Thomas' philosophy is a corrective and a solution to the problems of modern thinking, modern philosophy, modern theology. And one of the things that you'll learn about modern philosophy, modernism as sometimes it's called, is how it is riddled with self-refuting claims. Self-refuting claims. There's so much self-contradiction or self-refutation in modernism, in modern philosophy, in modern theology, that it really helps see through the errors by coming to terms with and having a sound understanding of the concept of self-refuting. So that's one of the payoffs of grasping self-refutation, of grasping self-contradiction. So just to repeat from the first segment, a self-refuting statement is a statement that includes itself in what it's talking about, and then it contradicts what it's saying. It is a statement that includes itself in what it's talking about, and the statement contradicts its own claim, meaning that you can safely set aside that statement, so that you can safely set aside much of the modern errors, much of the objections the world has today against Christianity in general and Catholicism in particular, are rooted in philosophies that are necessarily false. It's shocking, but it's true. And so you have nothing to fear when it comes to engaging non-Catholic and non-Christian point of view from modernism, because they're self-refuting. They deny their starting points. Just to give you an example of this, so to kind of whet your appetite for learning self-refutation. I believe I mentioned this in other episodes. But there was a debate between Matt Dillahunty, and he's debating Trent Horn. It's on the resurrection. And Matt Dillahunty, who is a former, maybe fundamentalist pastor. I know he's a pastor, but I want to say he was a former fundamentalist. So he's a former pastor for X amount of years, maybe 10, 20, something like that. And he, through studying and reading, ended up rejecting Christianity, is now a skeptic. I think he's technically an agnostic. I'm not sure how atheistic he is, but I think he's philosophically agnostic. He's definitely a secularist, and he's definitely a humanist. So in the debate, when Matt Dillahunty was starting his argument, one of the first premises was, I can only believe things that are based upon my common sense observation. It's something like that, okay? It's not exactly like that, but the argument had something to do with all of my beliefs are based upon, or all my claims are based upon what's common experience, right? What we see around us. Well, that's a self-refuting statement, because there's nothing in one's observations that tells you that's all you can know. It is the statement or the claim, our knowledge is limited to what can be observed, is a philosophical statement that goes beyond its own criterion. And unfortunately, I don't think Trent Horn ever called him out on that. But it's a self-defeating statement, meaning that he's doing the very thing, that is, he's going beyond observations, making a claim about what goes beyond observation, saying that you can't do that. And so, ironically, his entire case against belief in the resurrection is based upon a claim that is self-refuting, and therefore it cannot possibly be true, and therefore you shouldn't use it as a premise. And see, that self-defeating statement that all my knowledge is limited to what I can observe, or what I've commonly observed, or what my common sense and common experience tells me, he's already precluded any evidence whatsoever for resurrection, because it's all going to come through this self-defeating grid. All of it. There's another debate with Matt Dillahunty where this is really explicit when he's debating the Baptist historian Michael Licona. I don't know where this was being held, but I think it's another debate on the resurrection. And Mike Licona gave him a scenario like, well, what if someone was decapitated and you saw that they were decapitated? Sorry for the the imagery there, but this is Dr. Licona's example. It's something like that, and then a few days later I come back and I'm healed and my head's back on there. Wouldn't you think that, possibly could be a miracle? And unfortunately, that doesn't get at it. What Matt Dillahunty is going to say, whatever my common experience and common interaction with the world tells me is going to negate or trump anything that's going to come from your supernatural worldview. And you can see that. You can watch that debate. I think it's in the cross-examine section of the debate. If you're interested in that, it's on YouTube. You can watch it. And again, Dr. Licona does not call him out for his self-refuting statement. Because if it gets pointed out to Matt Dillahunty that he has a self-defeating premise, then he has to build an entirely different case. He's going to have to deal with the evidence for resurrection. He cannot rule it out in principle. And moreover, his position is arbitrary. He's picking some statements to go beyond observation to believe, and not others. For example, I'm assuming as a humanist, he's an evolutionist. In particular, he's a Darwinianist. Well, in our common experience, the way we observe the world, we never ever observe life coming from non-life. I'm sure Dillahunty believes that. But if Dillahunty believes that sometime in the past life came from non-life, then he's believing something that goes beyond anything that he's observed in his common experience. So again, you can see, and again, that you can pick and choose what things you want to believe when it's a self-contradiction. So that's the importance of self-refuting. And again, as we go through a lot of the modern philosophy that's coming up, we're going to look at agnosticism and skepticism and naturalism. The point I'm making today in this episode is going to come and be applied again and again. Self-refutation. So what I want to do in the second segment is I really want to go through a lot of examples. I'm sure that you're listening to this. You're maybe on the road in your car or just trying to think these things through. And so I've gone through sort of the technical stuff in the first segment. This second segment, we'll just start diving into everyday examples, and I'm going to give you lots of them. So let's go through some straightforward examples to give you the logic of self-refutation. So that's what we're going to be looking at right now. What is the logic of self-refutation? How does it work? Example number one. our standard example, our go-to, our stock example. All English sentences have 10 words. The statement itself is an English sentence. It doesn't contain 10 words. Ricochet, boomerang, Ralphie shoots himself in the eye. The statement defeats itself. Example 2. There's no truth. There are no truths. This statement claims a truth about truth. And so if it's true that there are no truths, it contradicts itself. Ricochet, boomerang, Ralphie shooting himself in the eye. It's self-refuting. So if someone says there's no truth, well, they just gave you one. Hence the contradiction. Okay? Are you asking, is it true that there are no truths? Right? So when someone speaks something or says something, does it refer to itself? If it does refer to itself, check. Make sure it follows its own rule. If it follows its own rule, or if it satisfies what it's saying, then it's not self-refuting, and therefore it could possibly be true. But if it does refer to itself, and it doesn't satisfy its own criteria, if it doesn't satisfy what it says, then it can't possibly be true. And so let's look at different categories of very common day-to-day self-refuting statements where we see in online, our media, conversations, all over the place. So how to spot self-refuting statements? You've got to see a pattern. Look for patterns. So the first group is going to be self-refuting statements when it comes to truth and knowledge. Again, our stock example of truth and knowledge. There are no truths. This is an undeniable, it's necessarily false. So then what's the takeaway? Why does this matter? Because it's impossible to get rid of truth. It is undeniable that truth exists. Because if there isn't any truth, it would be true that there weren't any. That is, it's impossible to get rid of truth. You can't do it. So we're stuck with the truth, at least the existence of truth. Another example. All truth is relative. Can't affirm that. It's actually unaffirmable to say all is relative, because that's a non-relative truth. To say all truth is relative is, listen to it. All truth? Well, all isn't relative. All is absolute. So all truth is relative is the one absolute truth, according to its own criteria. Therefore, it's impossible to affirm that everything is relative. And guess what exists then? There's an absolute. Now, that doesn't mean we know what it is, right? Again, just because it's undeniable to say that there's truth, it doesn't mean we know what the truth is. We still have to go investigate. Just because it's actually unaffirmable to say all truth is relative, it means there is something absolute. We may not know what it is yet. We have to go seek it, but we know that it exists. Next example. No one can know reality. You see a lot when it comes to skeptics. A lot of people who are, and particularly pantheists and humanists, we can't know the truth about reality. We just know how the truth appears to us. That's actually undeniable. Why? Because you're saying something about, you know something about reality in that statement. That's giving you information about reality. It's telling you something about reality's relationship to your own mind. And so you can know reality. I know everything by feeling. I know all knowledge by intuition. Those are non-emotive and intuitive ways of knowing. There's no emotion for that. What emotion allows you to know that everything's by emotion? That's a non-emotional statement. That's not an intuition. That is, when you say I know everything by emotion or intuition, that's a conclusion you're drawing from beliefs. Which means what? There are non-emotive and non-intuitive ways of knowing. All knowledge comes from my senses. All knowledge comes from observation. Well, not that one. You don't observe. There's no observation that comes with a little tag, or a little sign that says, this is all you know. It doesn't exist. So those who say, I only believe something if I can sense it, well, they shouldn't believe that. Self-defeating statement. Finally, I was, another example of self-defeating statement, I was in a meeting one time, we're talking about philosophy of education. And you'll hear this said lots of times. There are multiple ways of knowing. There are different kinds of learners. Which is, true, right? That is true. Some people learn easier by hearing. Some people learn easier by imagining. Some people learn easier by reading. But the statement, the book that says there are multiple ways of knowing, how did you arrive at that? Like, what mode of knowing allows you to know there are all multiple ways of knowing? I was actually in this meeting, and I asked one of the teachers, I said, well, whatever way of learning allows you to arrive at the truth that there are multiple ways, let's just do that one. And I think it went right over their heads. But the point is clear, right? Of course there are different ways of learning, but the statement that there are different ways of learning doesn't come from the multiple ways. Like, where's that coming from? I mean, did you learn that through hearing it? Did you learn that through watching it? So, at its stands, it's a self-defeating statement. It's actually unaffirmable. What is true is that people learn easier in other ways. But this idea that we can just categorize someone, they're all this way or that way, you're going to end up with a self-contradiction. It's like going, I know some of you have been in meetings where they say, now, you should never use a PowerPoint to give a presentation as slide 1 says so, right? And they're showing you a PowerPoint telling you shouldn't use PowerPoints. I mean, I've been in meetings like that, and you just start to lose your mind a little bit. But that's a self-defeating pedagogy. These are self-defeating statements. And what does that mean? It means we can arrive at some serious fundamental truth. We know there is truth. We know that there are absolutes. We know we can know reality. We know that we can transcend our emotions and intuitions when we learn something. We know that we know things beyond the senses. We know that we can grasp different ways of knowing. And we're not limited to this one way of knowing. Those are all self-defeating statements. That is, getting rid of those statements is self-defeating, and that's the payoff. What about existence and reality? Like, I do not exist, or nothing exists. Right? This happens a lot when you're dealing with a pretty well-read skeptic. They're going to say that nothing created the world. They're going to say that. You can read people like Lawrence, what's his name? I'll bring it up later. Lawrence something, Peter Atkins, he's a famous physicist. He'll say something like that. Some of these, again, you see these physicists, these high-powered theoretical physicists debate over, say, cosmology, that God created the universe. They'll say nothing. Oh, Lawrence Krauss is the atheist. I think he has a book called Nothing Created the Universe, or something like that. Well, it's self-defeating to say that nothing exists, because it's no longer nothing. It's really sloppy, and it's self-defeating. But their entire denial of God being or any sort of agent being the efficient cause of the existence of the universe is based upon a self-defeating understanding of nothing. And that needs to be pointed out. Or, I do not exist. I had a lot of skeptics say, they don't know if the world's around them. They don't know if they're, maybe the Truman Show. Maybe that's all we're stuck in, a Truman Show. Okay. These are self-defeating, which means what? You do exist. You have to exist to make the denial. And it's impossible for nothing to exist, because you have to exist in order to say that there's nothing. So nothing requires something. And then there are some powerful arguments for the existence of God from these seemingly obvious, self-evident statements. Because if something exists now, and nothing comes from nothing, then there's always been something. And there's a straightforward proof for the existence of God. because that something is either absolute or it's relative. And we know there's at least one absolute, because you can't deny the existence of absolute truth without making an absolute truth. Okay. So we looked at self-refutation and truth and knowledge. We looked at self-refutation, existence and reality. And you're going to hear these things. You're going to encounter these things. Now, probably the biggest one, when it comes to self-defeating, is when it comes to morality, politics, culture, ethics. We see this all the time, because the default position of the world that you and I are in is relativism. There are no absolute ethical standards. There are no morally objective truths. So fornication can be moral to some person, not moral to another. Some people think divorce is okay. Some people think divorce is not okay. Some people think that abortion is allowed. Some people think abortion shouldn't be allowed. Some people think that body count doesn't mean a whole lot when it comes to the sexual past. Some people think that's a sign of immorality. And there's just debates about whether or not you should have kids should have access to pornography in libraries, whether we should censor things. There are debates about whether we should limit free speech. It's just on and on and on. Okay? Well, what's behind a lot of people's views is that, well, it's just really, there isn't any really, there's no one answer. It's all relative. Well, the problem with moral relativism is that it is riddled with self-refutation. For example, you should not judge. You've heard that a lot. You should not judge. Well, what's the problem with that? That's a judgment. The statement, you should not judge, is itself a judgment. And therefore, judgment is unavoidable. It's unavoidable. There are no absolute ethics. There are no objective truths. Those are self-defeating. Now, here's something that's tricky. Okay? Something is tricky. The statement, there is no moral truth, is not self-defeating. Excuse me. Just listen to the statement again. There is no moral truth is not self-defeating. It is not self-refuting. Can you see why? Just think about that. Get that statement in your mind. There is no moral truth. Why is it not self-refuting? Because it's not a moral statement. The statement, there is no moral truth, is not a moral statement. So it's not self-defeating. It's not self-refuting. However, what is often self-defeating is when there's the follow-up addition. We should be tolerant then. There is no moral truth, and so we should all be tolerant. Those two together are self-defeating. They deny each other, because if there is no moral truth, then there's no moral principle of tolerance, because tolerance says be tolerant whether you like it or not, right? We should be tolerant, or tolerance is a moral statement. And so, again, so many in our world today we're saying two things that can't possibly go together. Be tolerant, and there's no moral truth. And this idea of tolerance is an error in thinking. That is, tolerance isn't an absolute. Why? Well, what is one of the most tolerant, accepting things in the world? What is one of the most indiscriminating, accepting things in the world? Well, one possible answer is the sewer. The sewer is virtually completely non-discriminating. The only thing a sewer does in discriminating is fit. Whatever can fit in a sewer goes in. Completely non-discriminating. Now, a completely tolerant mind, in a way, is a sewer mind. We don't want sewers for mind. But why? Because we need to discriminate the true from the false. Right? Sewers take in the good and garbage. We want to have minds that discriminate. We want a mind more like a mouth. A mouth closes when it's properly fed. A mouth closes when it's satisfied. Okay? And so hopefully, here we are in the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed. We are finishing up our second segment of today. Got a few more minutes here. And what I'm advocating here now is having a sound Thomistic mind, not having sewers for minds. Okay? If my students always get a kick out of that. So you're saying we have sewers for minds? I'm not telling you that you have sewers for minds. I'm characterizing what a sewer looks like. Completely non-discriminating. When you think, what's a sewer mind? A sewer mind is kind of like someone who just stares at a screen all day and doesn't discriminate what it watches. Just all the images, whether disturbing or beautiful, it just takes it all in. All right, so in our schools today, and in so many kids today, they're just staring at screens. The screen is bad enough, but a screen is a sewer. So many of these things, they go from one video to the next. We're seeing more sewer-like in our entertainment. There's no thread. There's just all this stuff just thrown together. I mean, you're watching a movie. I was watching recently a movie on spying, on spies. It was really cool. And all of a sudden, it's gotten into this real debauchery. Like, what? That has nothing to do with the story. Wasn't a sound mind making the story. Somehow the mind thought it fit. We need to have a Thomistic mind that closes when it's properly fed, and it needs to have a good reason to be opened. I have a very good friend who's evangelical, and he's not Catholic. He's been, and how do I get my good friend to rethink the Catholic Church and Catholic theology? I've got to give him a reason to open his mind, and I gave him my argument for the real presence in John chapter 6. Okay, a closed mind must have a good reason to open. It's got to have something to smell. Like, if you're going to open your mouth, you got to have something that's good to smell, pleasing to the eye. So a closed mind is going to open it for a good reason. And we've had some really good conversations lately. So, again, why does this happen in our culture? Because we don't understand the distinction between the self-refuting nature of we should all be tolerant all the time. Tolerance cannot be an absolute, and tolerance does not apply to truth. Tolerance applies to people. We tolerate people. We shouldn't tolerate evil. We shouldn't tolerate falsity. If something's false, we shouldn't believe it. If we disagree with someone, we should tolerate each other. That's different. We tolerate people. We love people. But when it comes to logic, when it comes to truth, truth is discriminating. Truth is going to not accept the truth. I mean, so the truth is something that's going to discriminate. The truth is not compatible with the falsity. So that has been our second episode. Sorry for an abrupt ending here, but I've got to finish off today. So thank you for the Thomistic Mind, and until then, may you love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and yes, with all your strength. You've been listening to the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed, produced by Mr. Matt Graham. To learn more about our rigorous philosophy courses, visit us online at www.readthomis.com, www.readthomist.com. It's been a privilege to journey with you through the world of philosophy, seeking truth, goodness, and beauty together. My hope is that today's conversation encourages you to think more deeply, live more wisely, and love more fully. Until next time, keep your mind fixed on the truth and your heart set on the highest good.